All right, everybody, and happy Father's Day. This is the day that I am recording this video. So if you happen to be watching this today, happy Father's Day. And if you happen to be watching it later, well, happy Father's Day in the future. Anyways, Camper 7.0, we've hit a bit of a milestone. So if you guys have been paying attention to videos, you guys know I've been working on the interior. And as you can see, the insulation is coming along well, but the milestone is the hanging lights. I know that's a strange milestone here, but what that means is I've gotten all of the roof insulation in place. Just kind of a little tradition of mine. Once I do that, I'll go ahead and loosely hook up these the lights that I'll be using to give the camper its own self-illumination as opposed to using a standalone little device. It's just kind of one of those things that I do. Obviously, sometime in the future, there'll be some trim and these lights will be properly secured. That will be in the near future, but for now, I just was hooking them up. As some of it's just as much as testing them and making sure I didn't knock any wires loose or anything. But anyway, so let's kind of get in where we're going. And the main topic of today's video is I am going to talk about and show how I do these fabric covered panels here. So just to catch this may not be too new if you guys follow my campers, but if you're new here or if you might have forgotten, what I've done on the vast majority of my designs is I will actually insert a insulating panel of some sort. So for example, like this piece of EPS here, into the internal frame members of the camper. So essentially what I mean by that is, so this would be the 1/4-inch wall, and the construction of this camper prior to the putting in the wall was building all of the frame, which is, you guys can see visible throughout this entire camper. And then the frame is skinned by the 1/4-inch ply. But what that leaves here is this leaves this internal gap, and that's purposeful because that gap is filled in with an insulating foam board like this, wrapped in a fabric, and I use duck, which has been explained to me as kind of like a lightweight canvas. And then particularly on these 1/4-inch ply skin campers, I will use one of my favorite adhesives, the Great Stuff Construction Adhesive. I will spray that in there, and I'm using EPS panels here. So what I do is I peel off the back. I talked about this in other videos, but what I actually did is bonded two pieces together. So this is a 2-inch, and then this is a 1/2 inch. Now, this is the first time I've done this on the sidewalls, but I say, let's go big or go home, right? Let's go ahead and make this thing even more well insulated. But bonding this on there gives me 2.5 inches of EPS insulation, which is, at least per their stated R value, is about 9 at 75 degrees Fahrenheit. But the interesting thing, the fun fact about EPS, and one of the reasons I like it, is as the temperature cools, the R value of this actually increases. Now, it's not substantial, but it's, if I remember correctly, down to about 30 degrees, the R value goes from 3.3 per inch to, I think it was like 4.26 per inch. I don't know. What does all that mean? Basically, I like EPS and it performs well at different ranges. The R values that are stated by companies are always based on 75 degrees, I believe it is, or 70, basically like a room temperature. But there are a lot of things that as they get hotter or cooler, their R value can actually change. But so I do these fabric covered panels. First and foremost is I think they look great. I think it looks really, really nice. They're lighter because traditionally what you would do is you'd put a foam panel in there and then skin it with something on the inside. And there will be portions of this camper that's done that way. But I came up with this method where, whatever the foam panel I'm using, usually I try to use EPS, wrap it in the fabric and snugly insert it in there. And then when using this construction adhesive on an outside wall that's going to be relatively stable like this 1/4 inch plywood. This EPS and that particular construction adhesive, I mean, it's like a permanent bond. So in addition, these panels give this camper an incredible amount of strength. But like we were talking about here is normally the depth of these frame members were 2 1/4, and originally I was just going to use a 2-inch piece, which means that it would have sunk in. But with this design, the panel itself is actually sticking out by about 1/4 inch, and I actually like that. That was something new I just kind of came up with on the fly here, but I think it looks great. And then on the outside, so you can imagine like right here would be a hollow spot between a frame section. When you bond in that that EPS panel on the inside with that wall, I mean, it almost has 0 deflection, so it's very strong. Another nice advantage of this of the fabric covered panels here is it has a really nice acoustic quality in here. It kind of just absorbs the sound, which is something I really like. Now, there's some imperfections and stuff. There's a lot of, I'm not done by any stretch of imagination in here in terms of insulating the walls. I've got trim that's going to go up to the top, trim that's going to go on this bottom section. There's a few things I need to even out and square away, but it's coming along pretty good. I love this technique. I think it looks really nice, and this camper is going to be super well insulated. Let me show you a little cross section here. So this is a cross section of the roof. So it's actually 4 1/4 inches thick, as you guys can see here. So we got the 1/4 inch ply there, 2 inches of XPS, which is actually bonded to this to the top of the roof here, and then 2 inches of the EPS. And then, of course, the fabric. Now, this hole right here is for the vent fan, so they'll be all blocked up at some point in time. But let's move over to the bench here, and I'll show you kind of how I wrap these EPS panels. So this little piece right here is the piece that will slide in up here, okay? Anyways. So what we'll do is this. All right, so I cut my fabric here. You want to cut it a little bit larger. You want to cut it a little bit larger because what we'll do is we'll glue it in place, and then we'll loosely wrap this around. And when we go to insert it into that wall section, we'll actually take a putty knife, and this fabric will be pushed against it nice and tight like this, and you won't even know it. Now, all these little fuzzies, this is probably driving some of you guys crazy. Yes, of course, in an ideal world, we wouldn't want these fuzzies on here, but here's the reality. They're going to be here. You start cutting up this EPS panel, you're going to have fuzzies. You can see the garage. There's fuzzies and fabric all over the place, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's just the way it's going to be. So what I will do is I'll shake this out really well. Whenever I start making these panels, I always take a clean rag and I moisten it. And as long as you just give the fabric a nice quick wipe down, it will get most of these fuzzies off. Fuzzies, you want to get as much as you can off, but they're not the end of the day. Use a spray adhesive. I use this, I just happened to pick this up at Lowe's the other day, and I actually like it. This is working out pretty well. It's a Loctite brand, but I've used a lot of other kinds of spray adhesives. Now, one thing with a lot of these spray adhesives is they will melt the EPS panels, okay? But that's one of the benefits of course, the shiny part here is going to be facing in, and most of the spray adhesive is going to be sprayed on this, and that's where the fabric is actually going to attach. So obviously it's not going to melt the EPS. However, I will spray just a little bit on these back sides, just a light film, just to kind of tack that fabric down around the sides. And surprisingly, I do just a very light film, and I've not had, I've done this for years now on multiple campers. I don't really have any kind of significant foam eating issues, and I think it's just because it's a light layer, and maybe because the fabric kind of absorbs a lot of it. But okay, so a couple tricks here. So we want to get this, wipe this off. Make sure you shake up your. Okay, now one key to a successful job here: let this spray adhesive tack up. because right now it's going to be kind of wet in a few spots, and if you put the fabric over the top of it, it will the adhesive will come through and discolor the fabric, and you'll either have to live with a blemish or you'll have to redo it. Okay, so I gave it about 3 minutes here, and this is just about perfect. Okay, so I am doing this one-handed, guys. Keep in mind. Now, if this spray adhesive is reasonably repositionable, okay? I remember when I first started doing this, I was always panicked about getting the fabric wrinkly and stuff like that on there. It's not that big of a deal because you have a little bit of time to work with it. Keep in mind, I'm doing this with one hand. I hope, see how they kind of showed through right there? That might be, I didn't let that glue, Hopefully, I just wet my rag. I hope that's what that was, and it wasn't the glue. All right, so you can see the sides here weren't even enough glue to kind of hold these in place. So we're just going to give it just a nice little light. And I know, Dave, it's going to melt the EPS. Yes, theoretically it will, but I have to tell you, and you guys do your own judgment here. But a light spray, and if it does eat it, it's not enough to make a difference on anything. Now, normally you wouldn't want to spray it on the fabric because that could show through. But keep in mind, this fabric is going to be tucked under, and it will not be visible. So I'm not too worried about it here. I still don't go crazy though. Okay, so just like that one, we're gonna want that. There we go, and then just tightly wrap this around like this. Right, so you take your rag, it's moistened. I'm just gonna give this a quick wipe down. It will dry, and you can see that's gonna be perfect. I'm always trying to think about safety, and I'm not endorsing any particular brand. This is just one that I found on Amazon that had pretty good reviews. But you can buy this fire retardant spray, and this one is specific for fabrics and upholstery. All right, now always color test things that you've done. Obviously, I've sprayed it a bunch on this duck here, and it will initially scare you and discolor it, but it will dry. It will dry, and you won't notice that you sprayed it on there. But it will stiffen up the fabric a little bit. That's going to be irrelevant when it's placed on an EPS panel like this. But if you're using it, on a seat or something, it would be something to know. It kind of feels like if you put light starch. I want the water to dry on that, so we're going to come in here and spray some of the panels. I did some tests, and I sprayed the panels after the adhesive was set, and it does not seem to affect the adhesive. And what you do is just follow the instructions on the I'm about out of this with this particular bottle here, but it just basically spray, it says spray it on there. They give some specific instructions. In my view, it seemed to work. I don't know. I think I bought 4 of these bottles, and I've only used one so far, and treated probably about 1/3 to half of all the fabric in here. And I bought 4 of the bottles. I think it was like $60 or $70 on Amazon. To me, I think it's a great peace of mind. And I think it also said you could spray it on other things like wood and stuff like that. So in a small confined space in here, obviously fire hazards and so forth are a concern. We'll cut it off here shortly, but basically what you'll do is, you guys see me wrap that fabric piece. I'll spray in the Great Stuff construction adhesive. I'll wipe this down, obviously make sure it's clean, and insert it in there. You don't want it so tight that you're deforming or breaking the EPS, because you don't want it to be compressed, because my understanding is it loses some of its insulating value. But you want it snug enough into there to where it doesn't has a nice close gap on the side, like this one, for example. And anyways, yeah, that's what I do. There is some downsides of this fabric EPS panels. Is it can be fragile. Like if you were to take your thumb and push into it, you can dent it. If a person were to making a camper where they'd have like small kids, or if it was like a rental camper or something like that, where it might be, receive some rough treatment, it may not be a good way to go. But for an adult-owned camper and somebody, who's reasonably conscientious. I've never had any real issues. And even if there is a little blemish or dent here and there, it typically blends in and you rarely notice it. All right, there you guys can see I put that piece in place and it looks just fine. Sorry about that light there. But this process is pretty forgiving. I mean, you don't want to go crazy. Obviously, you want things to be about as perfect as you can be. One thing I forgot to mention is how I cut this EPS. And there's a couple ways to skin a cat on that. One of them is I have a hot knife here. And this is just one I got on Amazon. And this will actually kind of, you hit the button and heat it up. And this one's kind of a mess. I got to clean up the blade. But that will cut through. That's good for making irregular cuts and stuff, but it's pretty hard to make really straight cuts unless you got a steady hand, plus it takes a long time. The advantage, though, is it doesn't produce a bunch of the fuzzies. But normally, as you guys can see from the saw right here, is I'll just cut it with the saw. Now, the downside is it creates a bunch of fuzzies. Not so much for the miter saw, but if you do like a rip cut, set cut, like for example on that one, cutting it the set thickness across the whole width there, it can be really dangerous in the table saw. I do it, but it has a tendency to lock up on the blade and do a lot of kickback. So I'm not so much worried about the foam kicking back and hitting me, though I have had thicker pieces that came in with some pretty good force. But I'm afraid of if you're guiding it and it rips back, your hand rolls into the blade. So I'll speak for myself, but as always, safety is a priority. I don't like cutting it with a table saw. There's some places where it's just better to do it that way, but I am exceptionally careful. And obviously, if you guys were to do something, do the same thing. I'll also just, this is kind of my utility circular saw here. I'll use, if I'm cutting like a big sheet for big pieces, that's probably the most effective and safest way to make the longer cuts. But that's just the way I do it. All right, guys, consume accordingly, and I hope you guys have a good Father's Day.